38 years in the business. I do think I know a little bit about asset management. I was technical director with Michelle for Highways Asset Management for some years. I have been a full member of the Institute of Asset Management for nearly 10 years. Obviously, this is a factual presentation. I am going to impart to you facts mostly, but obviously my opinions will creep in, and I'm sure you're all intelligent enough to separate fact from my opinions. But again, those who know me will realise that my opinions are as good as fact anyway. Right, onto the presentation. See the title on the screen, GS 801. GS 801 is also known as by two other names, the full name, Asset Delivery, Asset Inspection Requirements, and a not particularly elegant acronym, ADAIR. So you may hear it often referred to as ADAIR. I'm going to continue to refer to it as GS 801, just to emphasise to myself that it is part of the DMRB standards nowadays. And but I'll come on to that in a minute. I'm just going to switch on my pointer so I can direct you if I need to certain parts of the screen. Right. This is a slide I always start with. I've been using this slide for presentations for many years. I've given presentations on asset management and condition grading of various highways maintenance issues for many years now. I'm not a natural presenter, I have to say, but I am confident in my technical understanding of certain topics, and I want to share my technical understanding. But my presenting is not particularly natural, but I'm doing my best. And you will find that I won't just put up a whole lot of text and read it out. I do talk around graphics. Unfortunately, that means that when someone sees a PDF of my presentations afterwards, it's not particularly helpful, but that's my style. I just want to start off by reminding ourselves what how many different types of assets that we have to deal with as highway engineers in the local authority, local highway market, national highway market. This is you might think quite simple bollard, a simple asset. I'm always surprised how many people, even in the highways business, don't know why they look like the end of cannons. Because they look like the end of cannons because a lot of them were originally the end of cannons. They were spare cannons from the Crimean War or some war that where someone had a bright idea, you could drop them into the ground and they would protect the footways against errant vehicles. And that's why some of them are still there as original cannons, and it's been popular to recreate that shape in mild steel and plastic and all sorts of things. But from an asset management point of view, it's interesting to know a bit about that asset. If that is a real cannon, probably the wall thickness could be 40, 50 mil, and it'll probably take 1,000 years to rust away. And we can paint it to keep it aesthetically looking smart. And if someone drives into it, it'll probably not move an inch. But if it was a thin-walled replacement, steel replacement, or even plastic, that could well rust within 5 to 10 years. We might need to plan for its replacement. And so that's why we need to know a little bit about even what looks like simple assets. And then we get rather more complicated assets, complex assets that we have to deal with as highway engineers. That is a second Severn crossing. Oldham Wall going to looking after that bollard. And then we come to what is probably, if you weighed it out in terms of kilograms across the whole network, it would be the asphalt and the stones in the pavement would probably weigh more than concrete or steel or any other material. So it's all about the pavement, I'm afraid. So that's the pavement asset. And just to show that some local highway authorities seem to want to make their bollards far more complicated than they need to, this is a bollard in the City of London that presumably has to have that silver and red and white paint done in quite regularly, I should think. And we're all paying for that as taxpayers. And we may not think it's worth it, but that is what the City of London want, and that's their prerogative. A lot of it, say people know me, know that I'm thinking of looking for a common language. Even within the profession, we often trip ourselves up by using different words for the same thing and the same word for different things. So I'm going to try and say some discipline. And the example there, in terms of VRS, a set of initials, you all know what that means, and drainage. They're not assets, they are asset groups. And gullies are not assets either in the context. They are asset types. And if you're talking about assets, the word asset in this context is a single asset. That is a single crash cushion, which we need to know something about. We need to worry about it. We need to maintain, operate it, and check it out. And that is a single gully. Now that is we can only see the gully frame there. This one's nicely sunken down within the asphalt. That's another story. But in a Highways England system, that isn't a gully frame. That is the top of a gully. That is the gully as an asset goes underground, and it has certain attributes, different types of gully. So that's what we're trying to have some discipline in using language. And this is an interesting one, which I come to later. You may think I've gone mad, but on the motorway network, we don't have any traffic signs. Some of you know why that is. We'll come on to it in a minute. Question: why do we inspect and survey our assets? Now, you will probably think it's a stupid question. You probably think, well, it's obvious, but it is a question we need to ask ourselves because other people will ask it of us. Now then, I'm just broadening out before I go into the Highways England documentation. I'm just talking about ISO 55000. Now, I know that people in Area 3 from the provider, Kia, should be well aware of ISO 55000, its predecessor, PAS 55. My colleague Eloise and I led Kia's process to get themselves externally accredited as being good asset managers under the PAS 55 standard, which we did achieve 3 or 4 years ago. And I think probably A1 Plus did something similar. Highways England, they haven't actually formally done any external assessment against this standard. But so if you don't know of this 39 subjects, I suggest you do a bit of research. It's interesting background to us as highway engineers, highway asset managers. And for the sake, just to show that what we're talking about now is part of the much wider science of asset management, I point you to number 35 in these landscape subjects, asset performance and health monitoring. So that is the generic term that the Institute of Asset Management and asset management bodies through the world have decided to call condition monitoring, condition assessment, number 35, and also DSMI Heart as an asset data manager. It's all part of what we do, how do we collect and manage our data. So just to show you that it's a broader science than what Highways England tell us to do within their documentation. And just in case we want another example of why we need to check our assets every so often, this is a photograph that I've been using again in presentations for probably more than 10 years now. I took it, I say a long time ago, on my way to the office. I drove past it midweek, and I came back at the weekend with my camera. That's before the days we had decent cameras on mobile phones. And after I'd taken the photograph, I reported it to Surrey County Council on the following Monday. And I think within a couple of days, they came and took that top away. But it just shows what a horror story that is, what happens if we don't regularly look after our assets. You say that's not on the SRN, but you can see our bit of the A3. I think it's our bit, it might be in Area 5, just in the background. This is at Ripley in Surrey. And just to think that this can't happen on the SRN, I'm afraid it can. This one here is a signpost that I noticed New Year's Day, I think it was, or not the one, maybe, yeah. Anyway, I think it was a year ago, must have been last New Year's Day, driving along, I was in the passenger, and it turns out that sign was first reported as broken. It's not broken, it's rusted away by the AIW in December 2018. And certainly last time I checked with Debbie, it was still like that in July. Quite likely it's still like that to this day, coming up to its second anniversary as being broken down like that. And I'm afraid A27-303, let's not dwell on those. It shouldn't happen. Right, again, before I get into 801, I'm still talking around it, asset classification. Now this is where I'm talking about traffic signs. This isn't on the SRN again, it's just I happened to take a photo of it fitted my needs. Again, it's just on the A3 on the approach to, on the approach to the A3. Now, how many assets are in this picture? How many traffic sign assets? Well, you might think it's just one traffic sign with two bits of aluminium and 2 posts. Well, you'd be wrong. It's not a traffic sign at all, according to Highways Agency official classification. we have some signs, some post bracket signs and some sign faces. And in fact, you might think, is that 4 assets, 2 sign faces and 2 sign posts? Well, you'll still be wrong. It is in fact 3 assets. It is 2 sign faces and 1 sign post, which happen to have 2 posts. Now, you may think that's not logical. I may agree with you, but that's it. We have to deal with that because that is the official classification, and you'll see that in the ADMM. And it is significant when we come to recording condition and assessing condition. So no traffic signs on the SRM, just sign faces and post bracket signs. The ADMM, just in case you're not aware, these are published in 4 parts. You can pick it up off the standards for highways. The links are there. And it's in 4 parts, 3 text parts and 1 spreadsheet. The combined text parts is 529 pages. I say that is half a War and Peace, and we need to know those in theory. I'm afraid the ADMM is my new substitute for the Forth road bridge. Now that we can't use the Forth road bridge in the fact that that's continuous work because they've now got a paint that they don't paint it for a while. Unfortunately, with me, they've been publishing ADMM every 6 months for the last 4 or 5 years. And with 529 pages, it takes me 6 months to read and review that just in time to start again. And this is just to show you that the 4 sections, 3 PDFs and a spreadsheet. But again, you need to know that. I would do my best to try and point out bits, and I do my bit to try and point out relevant bits to relevant asset leads out of those 529 pages. But as I say, the current one's only been out a few weeks, and to be honest, I've barely scratched the surface of the 529 pages. Right, now we get to 801. This is what it's all about eventually, after X number of slides. This is just a screen grab of the cover page, show that it's in the new DMRB style fashion. We've got the 4 logos of the 4 devolved authorities for highways. They obviously all got their own, are proud of their own ability to set their own standards for highways, but they don't seem to be bothered to write them. I'm sorry, that's me being naughty. They do piggyback on ours. Anyway, so that's the cover page, and the version we're working on is the first version of this under the DMRB, published in November 2019. And now they should say this is interesting. The England part is only 21 pages. That's a fraction of War and Peace. Very, very small document. Should be easy for us to read and understand. Just again, I just want to make reference to another document, which in a way is a sister document, but not really. It sort of has connections with 801, GM 701. Again, often known by the rather even more forced acronym ADAMR, and that's it, Asset Delivery, Asset Maintenance Requirements. It is a completely separate document. I do believe that I will mention this a bit during the presentation, we as asset management need to know about it. The England part is a bit longer than the 801, 112 pages. Well, the way that it's set up within the current operating structure, as far as I can see, the responsibility for the works that are in 701, which is basically routine or cyclical maintenance requirements, is managed by the service delivery branch and not us in projects and development. And this will show that this is the current active area 4 MRP under the AD, and you can see from the document there that it is owned by the head of P&D, and the authors are within the P&D. Well, they're not all actually within the P&D now. There's a mixture there, I think, of authors, and I just hope that whoever's managing the processes under the MRP, hope they're better at that than they are at word processing. That's just me being naughty. Right, and again, just to remind those who've been around the business, these are the sort of previous documents that 801 and 701 have not replaced exactly, but the stuff that's in 701 and 801 used to be years ago in the TRIM, Road Maintenance Manual, and then more recently in the Routine and Winter Service Code. These are defunct documents now. Well, I think they're probably still being referred to by some of the obscure DBFOs that are going on, but not for us in old Area 3 and 4 Southeast region. Right, 801. What's in 801? Here's the list of contents, which you can read. And for the sake of this presentation, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going through each section of that. I'm not going through each asset type. Just going to pick a selection to give you a flavour. And I'm looking at very briefly on safety patrols, safety inspections, because they're in 801. Although again, under the way we're working, that seems to be the responsibility of service delivery rather than P&D. I'm going to look at structures first, then traffic signs, and then drainage and service ducts for reasons which will become clear. Just very briefly, what does 801 say on safety inspections or inspections for safety? Highlighting there, the inspection frequency may vary depending on the type of inspection, asset characteristic of the network characteristics. So when I was first in trunk road maintenance 30 years ago, we had the trim, and the trim said you did safety inspection on the motorway every week and the trunk road every 28 days. Now you have to do this network risk categorization and risk categorization to determine how often you do safety patrols, how often you do safety inspections. This is not just written down that you will do it this way, this often up and down the country. You have to work it out for yourself. And just in case, before you get carried away with the power of the decisions making ability, you've only got 3 choices. You can't just go off and work it out to do it every 10 days or every 13 days or every 14 days or every 3 days. You can either have one of these 3 regimes, but you have to do the risk categorization. If you don't do it, that risk categorization, before you go out and do your safety inspections, you're in breach of 801. Right, that's enough on safety inspections, because I say it's not for P&D to worry about it too much. Right, I'm going to start with structures as an example of what 801 says. The reason I start with structures, I'll tell you why I'm starting with structures. It's not because they're the sexiest or the most complicated asset that we have to deal with, because they're not. It's because they are, some non-engineers probably do see them as sexy and important structure assets, and they would understand why we have to check them so often, simply because they can all understand the consequences if a bridge falls down, which we all can. So it's easy, I think, easier than some assets, for us to tell the bean counters and the administrators, who somehow seem to end up in control of engineering operations, that we need the resources to regularly check our structures. Where is that written down? How do we know what we should do, apart from our own engineering judgment? Well, again, before I go to 801, I'm going to refer to CS 450, well known to all you structures people out there as the formerly BD 63, 139 pages. Again, not a hugely long document, but gives you an idea of the detail that goes into. And this is an extract from 450, CS 450, 450. It describes 5 types of inspections that the bridge engineers have to do or might think about doing on structures. And for frequency, it gives us, as an example, general inspections shall be undertaken at intervals every 24 months. It doesn't say you can do a risk assessment and decide how often to do it. It just says you will do it every 24 months. And the other people, the authors of 450, realise that we can't necessarily get exactly on possession of a structure to look at it exactly when we want to on the very day, because there's so much else going on the network. They give us the introduce the concept of a tolerance, which is common sense. It doesn't say how long big that tolerance is, whether it's within 1 month of the 24 months or whatever, but it's a good concept which you all know in practice we need anyway. Principal inspections. Now, principal inspections, again, when I was a boy, I thought they were always done every 6 years, but now we do have some variety, depending on risk assessment. Again, but we haven't got that many options. We can't decide to do it in 7 years or 9 years. every 7 years or 9 years. We can only decide to do it every 6, 8, 10 or 12 years. But again, we have that option now if we do the right risk assessment and everyone agrees on it. So that is what 450 says. Right, now what does 801 say about structures? Right, now prepare. This is obviously the real start of telling you about 801. You can read that. It's what, barely 4 lines, 3.5 lines. Well, that's it, really. So anyone who's worried about structures, worried about 801, don't really need to even bother to go and download it now, because that's it. I've told you what it says, and it just about tells you to read BD 63 or 450 as it is now. And just to pad it out a little bit, it just reminds you that your inspectors have to be competent to do the bridge inspections. Nice and simple, isn't it? So that structure's done. Traffic sign, faces and posts, bracket signs. What does 801 say about that? Well, again, I'm not starting with 801. I'm starting with another DMRB document, CS125, which is formerly TD25. It's got 58 pages, inspection of traffic signs. And this identifies 4 types of 4 different elements. It calls it elements to be assessed in the inspection of traffic signs: visual performance, structural integrity, electrical safety, and the need for revision and replacement. What does it say about frequency? Inspection of traffic signs should be undertaken periodically. The frequency and time of inspection should be determined by means of a risk assessment. There again, the versions of TD25 up till 2015, it said you would do an inspection of every traffic sign every year. Didn't give you any choices over that, just every year. Now we can do a risk assessment to determine how often we do an inspection of traffic sign. But again, the authors of CS125 don't really give us carte blanche to go away and make crazy decisions like not doing brand new signs till they're 5 or 10 years old. No, that would just be too risky, according to the authors. So the maximum that you can ever think about after you do your risk assessment is no greater than 2 years. So if you've just put in a nice new aluminium sign face on an aluminium post with diamond grade reflectivity, you've got to go back to it within 2 years to make sure it's not corroded, or the stainless steel fixings haven't corroded. You've got no choice in it. You can't. Anyway, so that's what CS125 says. And how does 801 back this up? Oh, well, and the other thing about 125, which I'll come to later, it doesn't tell you how to grade. It doesn't give you any prescription on the grading scale, what you should be looking for really when you're looking at these. Particularly, I'm thinking about structural integrity, how you grade it, what data you collect. It doesn't give you any hint or clues on that. 801 on traffic signs. Well, again, it's a bit longer than the structural than the structures side. Again, but it pretty much says, if it takes longer to say it, refer to CS125. It even repeats itself really. That referring to 125, it sort of says it twice really. So obviously, whoever wrote that section thought it should be longer than 3.5 lines, so it's padded it out, but really it doesn't say anything more than that. Go to 125 and do what it says there. And this is interesting, I noticed, because I don't think this is in 125 actually, and this is quite a big job in itself. Not only the signs on our network, directly on our network, but the signs that are out on the wider world with the symbols on it that we use for tactical and strategic diversions. Now that is a mammoth task, making sure all those symbols are still as they should be on other people's assets. I'm not going to dwell on that, but anyway, that's a requirement under 801. We haven't got an inventory of those signs as far as I know. Well, so anyway, interesting. It's interesting that 125 doesn't seem to cover it as far as I can see. And the other thing you notice that's one of the things that was under, sorry, I should have pointed out under structures. Under the structures, I think the last line was to make sure your inspectors were competent to do the inspections. 801 doesn't mention it here. It may be in 125 anyway, but I'm just pointing out that the way that the authors of the little bits of there's no consistency within the sections of within a text of 801 from asset group to asset group. You also notice that it seems to me that neither CS125 nor GS021 seem to acknowledge the ADMM classification system, which again I think is a failing in Highways England's joined up thinking for asset management, but that's just me. Right, the drainage asset group, third asset group I'm going to look at this afternoon. How many drainage asset types do you think we've got? Well, I can tell you I've made it 60. 60 different asset types under the group in drainage. All of them with their own different characteristics. We have people on the call of far more knowledgeable on the individual types of what they do, how they're made, how they need to be maintained, how often they last before they have to be replaced or refurbished. 60 different types. You'll see from my table here, we've got an asset name in the second column, and in the third column we've got a 4-character code. This is the asset code in the ADMM, and you'll see that some of them are missing. Now, where there isn't an asset code, it means that the assets, and I've highlighted just a few here, there's like aprons and pump wet wells, they're used as asset names in other documents, but they're not in the ADMM. Again, seems a lack of joined up thinking within Highways England. And I have pointed this out to the authors of the ADMM and the authors of 801 some months ago, and trying to be helpful. I've had no acknowledgement, but I would expect at some point they'll work out what assets we have and agree a name between ourselves. Right. Now, for drainage assets, whereas the other two examples I started with another DMRB document, I am actually going to start with 801. What does 801 say about drainage assets? Well, here we are. It's using. So I didn't point out, but you can see that the 801 uses the old 100 series DMRB MCD, the Manual for Contract Documents for Highways classification in the hundreds series. So drainage and service ducts, and you see this actually goes into a bit more detail than the other two so far, and actually highlights particular asset types within the drainage group, and actually gives you frequencies. It's a little bit haphazard, a little bit not particularly in a nice. You think it'd be in a nice table form or database or something, but it's all there in text form. Well, is it all there? That's the question. And then we have procedural requirements. The first thing I notice about this thing is this first line: inspection shall be in accordance with the DMRB. Now that's suspicious. You notice that all of the other sections of the 801 that we looked at so far says pick the DMRB document, but this one just says the DMRB. Now, do the authors of this bit couldn't be bothered to look at what part of the DMRB applies? Did they not know? Seems a bit odd. Surely they could help us a little bit more than that. But I'm going to tell you that the primary document for this is CS551, and in particular the Appendix B of CS551, which I'll come on to in a minute. And the other thing interesting to note at the bottom here, which again we didn't see any reference in the previous two, is a reference to the MCHW, which is interesting because that implies that not only do we have to worry about the condition of the drainage asset group, the assets within the drainage asset group, we also have to worry about, did the original designer build them to the right design? A whole new ball game. But that's what the implication is there, by making sure we as maintainers know what the MCHW said about these assets. Makes you think, doesn't it? And I just highlight grip traps there, because their grip traps is one of those assets that is mentioned in 801, but their grip traps don't actually appear in ADMM. Now, it may be that, again, I don't know what 801 thinks is as a grip trap. I think we might have a different idea what a grip trap is, and we different types of grip traps there are. But again, it's just an example that Highways England haven't quite even got the very basics of asset management in knowing what the names of their assets are. But again, that's just my opinion. Right, so now we're going to go to CS551, which is this one, drainage surveys, 109 pages. So not hugely detailed, but obviously something in there that if we want to know about how to look at what we have to do for drainage assets, we have to look at CS 551. And in particular, it's Appendix B we have to look at, because Appendix B is called this, Drainage Condition Grade Quick Assessment. Now, until CS 551 was published, not that long ago, I don't know exactly when, but it's quite a new document, there was a separate standalone document called Drainage Quick Assessment Guide or something like that, which was a separate document, not part of the formerly part of the DMRB. It has existed for some while, but now it is formally part of the DMRB as an appendix to CS 551. And Appendix B itself is 34 pages. What does Appendix B tell us about? As it says, it gives us a quick assessment method for each of the different assets. It does acknowledge that, and this is important, that the grading of condition is somewhat subjective based on experience of the inspector, which we all know, and they're going to assist in standardising assessments. They're going to give us some photographic examples, which again is quite unusual amongst the assets. You can't find those for structures. Well, I say that, not in the DMRB you can't. You can't find it for traffic signs. You can't find it for safety barrier. There aren't many assets that you can find photographic examples of different grades. I think you can have road markings in the, it's 126, I think it is, but anyway. So let's have a quick look at Appendix B. Table B3 is Chambers, Structural Condition Grade Quick Assessment, and there's two structural grades there, 1 and 2, with the definition and some examples. And the other interesting thing with Appendix B, you'll see from the title of these tables, this is for structural condition. And we also, in parallel for Chambers, have another scale of service condition. Again, we all know that is a blocked gully can still be structurally sound, but it's not really good if it's blocked with silt and not doing anything. So we understand the difference between structural condition and service condition. And CS 551 tells us we have to check both and make a record of both. And that's just 3, 4, 5. So we have a 5-point scale for structural condition, and a 5-point scale for service condition, 5-point scale for service condition. And they've got, you look at 551, they've got that for 20 or 30 different types of drainage asset, a set of pictures for the different assets, drainage assets. But as I said, what is condition grading? This is an important part of condition assessment. What scale do we use? Do we use red, amber, green? Do we just use yes, it's okay? We could use a 2-point scale saying yes, it's okay, or no, it's not. We could have a 1 to 100 scale. We could have 1 to 10 scale. Is there any clue as to what grading we should be using? This is 801. The highlighted bit there says where no asset grading exists in DMRB, this is the asset grading you should use. Effectively, well, they show 7 points there. We got 5 points from as new to significant damage or no longer fulfills, and we have an option 9 if you try to get to the asset but you couldn't get to it, and a grade 0 if you haven't even got there. Not sure the reason why you haven't even attempted to get there, but anyway, that's the condition grade that we're supposed to use according to the ADMM if there isn't a grade scale within the DMRB. Just to confuse the issue, the ADMM has got a whole section on condition grading, and it's fairly new actually. I think it was in the version before, but it wasn't in 2 or 3 versions ago. You wouldn't have found anything much on condition grading. But now the ADMM within its 529 pages has quite a bit on condition grading. And it tells us, again, goes through all the assets, telling us that there's a 5-point scale. It has the, it's interesting enough, if you have a look at the ticks here, you'll see that for bridleway we can use a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 5 or a 4 or a 5. But for some reason that I can't fathom, someone's thinking it's logical, for the cycle track and footway asset, we can't use 2 or 4. We can only use 1, 3 or 5. There's some logic there. I fail to see it. And again, just to show that it actually, this is very new within, I think, just in the current version. We now have 30 tables for 30 individual asset types having their own bespoke condition grade table. So again, it is what had been my ambition to make the asset leads aware of those tables in the new version of ADM. I haven't done it yet. I probably won't get around to it this side of Christmas. But if you're worried about it and you think your asset might be in there, you can go and look it up yourself. But I will get to it, I promise you. And just a couple of more examples, just so that environmental assets are new in the ADMM, and that we even have some environmental assets that have to have a 1 to 5 condition grading. Pavement, dear old pavement. Now you think pavement has got plenty of its own condition grading, condition surveys with the tracks and scrim and traffic speed deflectograph and all the other automated conditions. But there is also an option and a requirement, in fact, to do a visual assessment, and we're only allowed to use 3 points here, 1, 3 or 5. So that's something that we have to do if we're using those 3 points. Why we can't use 4, 2 and 4, I don't know. Right, now, again, some of you have heard that I have a bit of a thing about condition grading, and I've put a lot of thought into what is the perfect scale for condition grading. And I think I've come up with it. People disagree with me, but in fact, when people see it, a lot of people agree with me. And I have a whole presentation on condition grading, which some of you have heard, I think. I'm quite happy to give it again. I've given it up and down the country to various ordinances and local authority ordinances. And everybody who sees my scale, when I explain about it, thinks it's a good idea. But no one seems to have taken it up yet. Well, not that I know of anyway. But we have been using this scale in Area 3 for the last 3 or 4 years. And we're using it now. But when I'm gone in a few months, whether people choose to continue to use it or revert to the ADMM scales is up to them. But mine is infinitely better than the ADMM scales, and I'm willing to debate it with anybody at any time. But I won't go into it anymore today. Just to remind you, again, just to come to the conclusion now, 801 is about all assets, all asset types. So everybody needs to know what's in it. I've highlighted the various asset grouping names. These are the asset grouping names used in the MC, in the manual for contract. It's rather old-fashioned grade. It doesn't match the ADMM grading, but there you are. And even the 2 I've circled in fuchsia there, again, you're not sure are they really assets at all. Sweeping and cleaning and asbestos, they're not particular asbestos management, they're not particular assets, are they? They're operations, tasks, or whatever. So again, if you're involved in sweeping and cleaning or asbestos management, I suggest you read that bit of the 801. I promise you they're not very long, and worth reading though if you've got responsibilities for those areas of activities. And just to carry on, that I have given some thought in the last few months to more than even the number of asset types. I've looked at, by my table here, 135 individual asset types. What does 801 say about it? What does 701 say about them? What does the DMRB say about these assets? Just for my own education, and also the purpose I was doing it, apart from that, was I was trying to decide, look at the assets that weren't having proper condition assessment, which ones I could give to the AIWs to do. So hence I looked at all of them. And I think as some of you know, I actually picked 22 of these 135 to give to Area 3 AIWs, and they are currently doing condition assessment, condition monitoring of 22 of these asset types using my 4-point scale. But I have looked at all these other assets. I do have a database with these 135 asset types in, and I've got these things against them. I've looked at what 801 says. I've looked at even the basics of what 801 calls these things. I've made a note on the looking between 801 and 701. I tell you that because I think this is one of the big disadvantages of the AD approach, that it's separated out this activity of monitoring the condition of assets. I should have said when I was talking about the MRP, none of these inspection jobs are part of the scope of the MRP, so they're not delegated directly to the M&R provider. If you want, and that seems to be a loss of efficiency there. Whereas if you, for example, if you've got to go out there with your magic sponge and clean the sign face, and you've got to make arrangements to get to that sign face to clean it, you might think you could use the same opportunity to give that sign face a structural condition assessment, and may, if you were properly efficient, use the same person if you had the right tools and the right training. But that won't happen now, because the M&R is only going to be engaged to clean the sign. He's not going to be engaged to give you a condition report on it, unless you ask him, and he'll probably want a VO and paying for it, but it won't happen unless you, as the asset lead, arrange it. I've made my own obs, as I say, looking at what I think, whether I think 801's got it right or not. I've made my own recommendations, and some of them I think I disagree with the 801 frequencies. So again, if we wanted to follow my recommendation and depart from the 801 frequencies, we'd have to go through the departure process. 801 isn't like 701, it doesn't give you a baseline for inspections frequencies, they give you absolutes, other than in the cases where the DMRB lets you do a risk assessment. A lot of them are absolute requirements in terms of you will do this every year or you will do this every 5 years. Right, what's next? Yes, I call this Easter egg hunt, just to remind you that you just can't look at one document to decide what you are required to do. You have to look at the asset-specific documents in DMRB, which you should all be familiar with for your assets. You have to look at 801 now that I've told you about it. You have to look at the MRP. Now, the reason you have to look at the MRP, you only need to look at that if you want to try and coordinate your condition monitoring with routine or cyclical activities. If you don't want to, if you're not worried about the cyclical activities on your asset, you don't need to worry about the MRP. The ADM, as I've already told you, there's bits in there that you have to try and hunt out that might be applicable. You even have to say we always look at the MCHW for design standards. You might even find that there are asset-specific maintenance manuals hanging around. You'll find a lot of the assets in the MCHW, when they're built, the provider, the builder, is required to provide Highways England, the client, with a maintenance manual. Now, where you find those maintenance manuals 10 years later, when you come to maintain that asset, I don't know. But there you go. That's why I call it an Easter egg hunt. And I also, again, just to remind you about ISO 55000, again, a bit of hobby horse of mine that you want to learn about the wider science of asset management, and I think it's useful for you to do so. There are documents you can read. You can even join the Institute of Asset Management as an associate before you become a full member. This is me trying to be clever with a GIF, but I don't think it's working too well, because I think there's supposed to be some audio with this GIF, but it doesn't seem to be working. But that's just... So what I'm saying here is that compliance, 801 is a standard. Compliance is mandatory, not optional. It's got to be done. It's got to be done. Condition monitoring is required for all assets, not just structures, and the mandate applies equally to all assets. And now we come to the one slide that is probably the more important of all. And it's the one slide that I can't really help you with. It's no good you asking me how you do these things. I'll let you read it for a minute. Yes, you've got to make it happen. I think as asset leads for your assets, you've got to make it happen. It won't happen by itself. It's not automatically part of some term contract anymore. You've got to make it happen. And again, without wishing to insult your intelligence, just these are roughly part of all the things I think someone's got to think about as part of this process. organising this and planning this is not trivial for any asset, not even for a simple safety bollard or a simple signpost. All these things have got to be thought about. Have your inspectors got the tools? Do the inspectors know what to do? Who's paying for the inspectors? Where's the data going to, how's it going to get back to you? How are you going to store it? What are you going to do with it when you get it? Again, all things I can't help you with, really. Well, I can try. I can suggest various apps that might help you, or you might like to use an app in the 21st century rather than a form piece of paper or a clipboard or whatever. But really, in terms of the resources required for planning and actual site work and the resourcing for those, I can't help you. And just, this is literally my final slide. Bit of hobby horse of mine, again, common language that you read. I believe that there should be some discipline in knowing whether we're doing a survey or an inspection. And these words on this slide, which I put in quotes, they're not my words. You will find them in the 30-year-old edition of the TRMM. And you'll also find them, the exact words, in the current version of the ADMM. They've been carrying through Highways England documentation for 30 years. They're only written in the pavement section. Some pavement engineer 30 years ago thought that it was a good idea to differentiate between a survey and an inspection. And I agree with him. But unfortunately, none of the other asset people in Highways England seem to think it's important to make this distinction. But there you go. I recommend we do it, but I've been recommending we do this for some years. No one's listening to me. That really is the end now. So I think that took a little bit longer than 38 minutes in the rehearsal. But so now, if anyone's still with me, I don't know, I'll have to open up the Teams box and find that everyone's disappeared. I'm happy to say it's 10 to 4. You might want to start the weekend, or you might want to engage in debate. If I'd have guessed who was going to ask the first question, I would have said John Parfett. So, John, what do you want to say?
Yeah, in 801 for drainage, it's got the priority outfalls, A, Bs and Cs, which is a very unusual and very specific type of thing. So it's a bit weird to be in inspections. You wouldn't inspect an ABC, and validate an ABC's more like a survey. And I just didn't know whether that was in any of the other asset types. So you didn't talk on
that. I think that's what we learned. The fact is that it is all different for different asset types. There's no consistency even in the way that inspection and surveys and inventory requirements are defined and described. So, yeah, that is a thing that
So they talk about verifying a risk status, which is a bit weird for an inspection.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's one of the things I want to. You probably get from my tone that Highways England are not joined up in this. There is no consistency across asset types. But the fact is that whatever the DMI, the fact is that under CS 551, Appendix B, someone should be doing structural assessments and service assessments at set intervals for 60 different asset types. That's the crux of it. Karen, what can I help you with?
Hello, Trevor. A couple of things actually. If we can go back to the slide before when you were saying about just the one before the end, not it was the survey. The survey and the inspection. I'm just a little bit confused on that, because in the inspection part, it's saying defined as viewing of the relevant length of road, either on foot or from a slow-moving vehicle, to apply to a record judgment, but not to collect data. I thought the whole idea of an inspection was to collect data.
Well, no, so that is the point. Yeah. It's a subtle difference in a way that not everyone can see it, but that is actually the point. Though inspectors don't collect data. Let me explain. We traditionally do safety inspections on the trunk roads, motorways. We traditionally do them from slow-moving vehicles. Always have done. Now, what this means is that when you drive past, let's look at. Take traffic sign as an example. You're driving past and you're passing traffic sign after traffic sign after traffic sign. You are not saying to you're not making a note of traffic sign number 1 is okay, traffic sign number 2 is okay, traffic sign number 3 has fallen down, traffic sign number 4 is okay. You're not doing that, are you? What you're doing, you're driving along and see, oh, that traffic sign has fallen down. Now, if you were doing, that's an inspection. If you were doing a survey, what I want from a survey is for you to say traffic sign number 1 is okay. Write that down. Sign 1 okay, sign 2 okay, sign 3 not okay, sign 4 okay. That is collecting data. That is a survey. Does that make sense?
It does, but I kind of feel that that's what we do in an inspection. If we've got that on our tablet with all the assets, and as they're driving to each one, they're looking at each one, and if that sign's okay, they give it a grading as being okay.
Well, that's just sorry to interrupt you, stop you there, Karen, but that's the very point. What you're doing in that exercise is a survey, not an inspection.
Oh, okay, right.
But I shouldn't get hung up about it. I shouldn't get hung up about it because no one else really follows this language anyway. But that is that you have to understand, and I think you probably do understand it, even if you don't in your deepest psychology as an engineer, you do understand the difference. It's just that you hadn't probably thought about now until I've said you haven't thought about giving them 2 different names.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's the 2 different names. And just one other point to your grading. You're saying that we would need to know the age of each piece of asset.
No. No. There's nothing to do with age. Absolutely. Sorry, I sort of skipped over it, and I say, I could quite happily talk at length on asset grading, and in fact, I have a whole presentation on it. But since you've raised it, if you look at the scaling now, it's got nothing to do with age. Absolutely nothing to do with age. All it requires is for you to stand in front of a traffic sign. You've no idea how old it is. Or a sign. Let's take a signpost because that's a classic one. It's a signpost that's fall over, generally not the sign faces that fall off generally. So you're looking at this signpost. You've no idea how old it is. You've no idea how far it is into the ground. You can probably look at it and think it's a 3-inch post, old-fashioned terms, or a 4-inch post or whatever. And it may be a galvanizing, it may be plastic coated, it may be a modern one that's latex, aluminium. All I'm asking the inspector to do is look at it and say, well, there's not a lot wrong with that. It easily lasts 10 years more. Condition 1.
I see.
Or,
sorry, Trevor. No, that makes more sense. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And to me, this, the fact that I'm not going to go on about it, but the condition grades in ADMM, critical deterioration, less than 30% covering. I mean, how do you measure 30%? Have you got to get your rule out or some sort of grid out and measure? Is it 30%? Is it 29%? Is it 31%? It's just not practical, is it? Why write it like that? It absolutely makes no sense. It can't be done. And the same with this, as new. Well, okay, fair enough, as new. But look at the number 5. So it's significant deterioration, asset missing. Well, if it's missing, you can't give it a condition assessment. Sorry, it doesn't apply. It's not a condition assessment. Say it's missing. And it's not a condition. Once it's fallen down, you're too late to say it's. So a failed asset is beyond a condition assessment. And there's so many reasons. Again, you don't give people 5 options because they have middle bias. They pick number 3 all the time. So you only give them 4 options. And anyway, I'm not going to go on about it, but this is my scale. No one else uses it, only in Area 3. But everyone who sees it thinks it's a good idea. So I don't see why Highways England and the rest of the 152 highway authorities in England can't use it. Anyway, that's just my thinking.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you.
Okay, Phil Mays.
Yeah, it was just it's sort of carrying on from Cameron's point. So with the guys that you've got working on them ones you mentioned in Area 3,
yeah,
they're doing, I can't remember how many asset types you said it was now, 20 odd. 22, there we go. On them 22, they're doing condition surveys, so they're going to every single asset and give it a condition. Yeah. What is their instruction on when they necessarily then raise a defect? Yeah, well, the defect rules apply exactly as they do from a safety inspection. If they would defect it on a safety inspection, they defect it on a condition survey. But I tell you why I wouldn't expect to find a safety defect on a condition survey, because that sign, let's take a sign for example, that sign has been driven past already within
the maximum 6 days before you're doing your condition survey. So if there was,
should have been picked up.
It should have been picked up at that. So it's complete. This is where, again, another thing, it gets a little bit philosophical. And again, I could talk about it all day, the difference between a defect and a condition rating. Brand new car, you've just paid 25,000 for a brand new car, you're backing it out of the showroom and you ding and you break a rear light on a bollard. That car is a defect. It's still in condition 1. It's still in as new condition. And similarly, you could have a car that's a little bit ropey, got a little bit of lodging in the paint, but it's got a few dings in the seats. But if you're happy with those faults and it's past its MOT, it could be a condition 3, or it could be condition 4 even on my scale. 2 years left. You've got to replace your car within 2 years, but you're quite happy with those 2 years. You can still drive it around for those 2 years. You wouldn't defect it. You're not going to sew up the tear in the seat. So that is the difference between a defect and a condition grading. And again,
so fundamentally, the inspectors on a condition survey aren't really raising if there's minor rusting on a signpost, they're not raising a defect for that. They're just giving it a condition score.
Yeah. Apart from the fact that I don't know what instructions they've been given to raise defects. Yeah. But I would say
there's no guidance here about when to raise. Let's call them the old Cat 2 defects.
Exactly.
There's no. Yeah.
Exactly. This isn't a Cat 2 survey. It's not a detailed survey. It is a condition survey.
Yeah. And Karen, that's what we've got to get across the inspectors here now. We're only fundamentally doing condition surveys.
We're just doing safety inspections and condition surveys. We're not doing detailed inspections. That's right. In the old trim white days.
Yeah. So what you're saying is on the conditions, we do not pick up any defects.
Well, so again,
if a sign,
you would do if they qualify as a defect under what the guidance is for a defect under safety inspections, then you pick it up.
Yeah, you wouldn't ignore a safety defect, would you? But they should have been picked up through the safety inspections. Yeah.
Absolutely. But if you came across a sign that was dirty and there's nothing wrong with the sign, but it needs maintenance on it, that would be like a Cat 2 defect.
Well, hang on, let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you. So I know it rolls off the tongue. We've got to get rid of Cat 2 because they don't exist.
I know. Yeah.
What is that? That is a difference, and as explained, and again, you know this, but again, it doesn't necessarily come out. That is, as is the drainage, as I said in 551 Appendix B, the drainage people, a brand new sign could get dirty within 3 weeks in certain situations, and that is still an as new sign structurally, but it's dirty. And you're right, that dirtiness needs to be addressed. That is a service issue, not a condition issue. Yeah.
Right.
And you have to understand the difference. Now, again, whatever the criteria are, is if you've been told that you've got to report dirty sign faces, then you report it or do whatever you're supposed to do. You can still give it, but if you're doing that as part of, if you're there as part of a condition survey, my instruction to the surveyor is to look through the dirt and say, yeah, it's still in structurally sound condition. And it could well be condition 1 on my scale, but you might still then give a ticket to your provider to go and clean it.
Yeah, that example, Karen, I'd say we need to sort of be having the chats with Wayne to say, right, if we're picking up or if we're identifying routine type things during our search, how are we going to instruct the M&R to do them? Do we just assume that the cyclic program will do them, or do we need to raise defects that they are then instructed to go and clean that sign? But it might be that they do the clean of the sign as part of their cyclic and then they just close the defect at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. We will have that discussion. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
These things should all be in guidance documents, instruction documents. This amount of detail. This is where, again, the devil's always in detail. And again, in my opinion, certainly, I don't know, in A1 Plus, but certainly in Kia, we had a lot written about this sort of stuff. But I don't seem to have got around to writing it yet. Peter.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, and you've probably gone over the window, but very quickly, looking at some of the stuff around GS 801, and particularly around drainage, where there's a requirement now for doing surveys. I mean, we're not going to be compliant from tomorrow, so is there a period of transition for us to become fully compliant? Is there any mention of that?
Well, no, you say it's new, Peter, but in a sense, it's not new, okay. Because, and also it's. With respect, I mean, again, you're an engineer, we shouldn't have to be told to do condition monitoring of our assets, should we? It's just good asset management.
No, but
I mean,
real world is that we're at a point that actually there's a lot.
The DMRB quite often tells us what to do, so we haven't got to think about using our own judgment anyway. So, going back to those assets in 551 Appendix B, I mean, some of them were annual, some of them were every 5 years. The fact is, if the catch pit has to be looked at, or chamber manual change has to be looked at every year, I'm not sure it is every year, but let's say it was, any chamber that hasn't been looked at within a year, you've lost compliance. You're out of compliance. Simple as that.
Yeah. Okay. The other bit is really just relationship with service delivery. I think this document does start to bring us together. And I know you were saying in some items, okay, well, that's service delivery, that's not for us. I think as for Highways England, we need to make sure that someone's taking responsibility of those things, particularly where we were looking at safety patrols and inspections, as well as some of the other things. I think as a team effort, we need to ensure that we're covering those bases off and not just saying that someone else. Really more as an observation than anything, and I think that's something we need to work on. Okay,
thanks, Philip. As for time, ladies and gents, well, I mean, yeah, I think perhaps we've had enough, but I'm quite happy to take written. I'd rather take written questions, because then I can think about the answer, and we can make the answer. Some of you know me, I quite like writing. I think I'm a good writer. I write for a hobby. So I'd rather have a written question than I can do a written reply and that everyone can copy it, everyone can see it. But by all means, if anyone wants to phone me or do an audio with me on any of these aspects, any time in the future, but please do. I'm happy to discuss it. I'm like all of us here. Highway maintenance will be for another 3 months. It's it's part of my DNA. It's part of my interest. I'm happy I can talk about it all day. Along with cars and bird watching as well. So please contact me after the meeting if we want to close it down for today and start the weekend. Although obviously with Christmas coming up, I'm only working one day next week, so you haven't got much opportunity. But certainly in the new year, these issues won't have gone away. I can put around the PDF or the PowerPoint, but also once I stop recording, you'll all get a link to the recording, hopefully, of this, if it's worked, of this presentation, so you can go to a bit and review what I said and think about it, and perhaps some questions will come to your mind. So, and I should put out a questionnaire really saying, what do you think of the presentation, but I won't. Right, Chris, just one quickly then, and then we'll close it.
Yeah, really, it was just to thank you, Trevor, for your time and effort putting this little presentation
together. That's the only reason to let you in, Chris. I thought you might say that. Thanks very much.
No, yeah, it's very good.
No, thanks.
I know you'll respond to all the queries that do come through as well, so thanks for that.
Okay. All right, ladies and gents, have a good weekend. And by all means, come back to me on any topic. And happy to debate with you. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Trevor.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you.